The stray cat kept scratching the bookshelf. Then a stranger smashed the bookshelf and screamed. That compartment wasn't for puppies, dear. It was for him, Mrs. Albright whispered, revealing that the secret space behind the bookshelf was old Mr. Abernathy's ingeniously designed climate-controlled sanctuary for his beloved cat Ash. Accessible by hidden cat flap Doyle had blocked, meaning Ash wasn't just rescuing Phoenix, but desperately trying to reclaim his stolen home. Did that twist send shivers down your spine? Don't miss out on more gripping tales. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and listen to the full story to uncover every secret. The splintering crack of aging wood was impossibly loud in the suffocating stillness. Sarah's breath hitched, her arms aching, the cheap iron tire lever vibrating in her grip. Dust, thick and acrid, billowed from the gash she'd torn in the boarded-up rear of the abandoned shop. Another heave, and a section of rotting plywood gave way with a groan, collapsing inward into the black maw beyond. She coughed, waving a hand in front of her face flashlight beam, dancing erratically. Then she screamed, not a theatrical shriek, but a raw, punched-out gasp of horror that scraped her throat. There, in the dirt and debris of the shallow crawl space illuminated by her trembling light, was a huddled shape. Small, pathetically small, matted fur, the protruding ridges of a tiny rib cage. And it moved, a slight, convulsive shiver. Beside her, a low, guttural growl rumbled. The stray cat, the gray, battle-scarred Tom she'd seen for weeks, the reason she was here, pressed itself against her ankle. Its usual wariness was gone, replaced by an unnerving, focused intensity. Its yellow eyes, fixed on the opening, gleamed with a desperate light. A faint, whimpering sound, fragile as spun glass, reached her ears from the darkness. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. What had it been scratching at? What in God's name had it been trying to reach for so long? The smell hit her then, not just dust and damp decay, but something else. The fetid, cloying scent of sickness and desperation. She dropped the tire iron with a clatter, her mind reeling. What had she just uncovered, and why did the cat look at the hole with such an air of terrible, knowing urgency? The questions clawed at her as sharp and insistent as the stray's own desperate scratching had been against the unyielding wood. Sarah navigated the cracked sidewalks of the only neighborhood in Philadelphia, her delivery backpack a familiar weight. At 25, her life was a patchwork of gig economy jobs. Food delivery, a few dog-walking clients, the occasional freelance graphic design task that barely paid for her second-hand laptop. Her apartment, a third-floor walk-up overlooking a perpetually overflowing dumpster, was small, but it was hers. She was an observer by nature, a quiet cartographer of the neighborhood's slow decline and resilient heart. Olney was a place of faded grandeur, its sturdy brick row houses and once proud storefronts now showing their age, tattooed with graffiti and neglect. Yet life pulsed stubbornly on. The chatter from the bodegas, the distant clang of the L train, the aroma of frying onions from kitchen windows. The old Book Nook on 5th Street was a monument to this decay. Its windows were long since boarded over, the faded lettering of its sign barely legible. It had been empty for at least 5 years, a hollow socket in the streetscape. It was near here, on her usual delivery route, that she first noticed the cat. A medium-sized Tom, its fur the color of charcoal dust, with a torn left ear and a wary intelligence in its amber eyes. Locals, if they referred to it at all, called it Shadow, or sometimes just that gray cat. It was a semi-feral creature keeping its distance, a fleeting ghost in the urban landscape. Sarah had a complicated relationship with animals. A childhood dog lost too soon had left a tender scar on her heart. She'd volunteered at a shelter in her teens, witnessing enough heartbreak to make her cautious about emotional investment. Still, she couldn't help but leave out a small dish of water on scorching summer days or accidentally drop a bit of leftover chicken near a known stray hangout. The neighborhood itself hummed with a low-grade tension. Businesses struggled, rents crept up. Some older residents, like Mrs. Henderson from the corner store, grumbled about the decline that trashed the stray animals. Mr. Petrov, who ran the struggling hardware store across from the book nook, was particularly vocal. He saw strays not as lost souls, but as vectors of disease and mess, another sign of the neighborhood's unraveling. His temper was as short as his till was often empty. Sarah had seen him chase pigeons with a broom, his face contorted in a mask of impotent rage. She always steered clear of him. For the past month or so, the gray cat's behavior had become odd. Instead of its usual furtive foraging, it was fixated on the rear of the abandoned book nook, specifically a section of boarded-up access panel near the foundation. Sarah would see it there at all hours, scratching, sometimes pawing, its attention utterly consumed. It was this peculiar, persistent scratching that first snagged her attention, a discordant note in the familiar symphony of the street. She hadn't known then how deeply that simple, repetitive sound would draw her in, or what lay hidden in the shadows of the forgotten building. Weeks passed, and the gray cat's ritual at the back of the book nook didn't cease. If anything, it intensified. Sarah found herself altering her delivery route slightly just to pass by a knot of unease tightening in her stomach each time she saw its thin body pressed against the grimy boards, claws rhythmically scraping. At first, she thought it was hunting mice, or perhaps had a litter of kittens stashed somewhere nearby and was trying to enlarge an opening. She left a can of tuna a few feet away once. It remained untouched, the cat utterly absorbed in its task. One late afternoon, cutting through the alley behind the bookstore, she saw Mr. Petrov. He was wielding a half-full watering can, his face a blotchy red. The cat was at its usual spot, scratching. Petrov shouted something incoherent, then viciously hurled the contents of the can. A yowl of pain and surprise tore from the cat as it scrambled away, drenched and shivering. Petrov kicked at the boards it had been scratching, muttering curses about filthy vermin and property damage. Sarah froze, anger flaring hot and quick. She wanted to shout at him to intervene, but the venom in his voice, the sheer meanness in his posture, made her hesitate. He was a local business owner. She was just a delivery girl. She bit her lip watching him stomp back towards his store. The cat, after a few minutes, crept back, limping slightly, and resumed its desperate scratching, its fur now dark and matted. That incident was the turning point. The cat wasn't just exhibiting strange behavior, it was enduring cruelty for it. Sarah's vague concern solidified into a pressing need to understand. What could be so important that this wary, street-smart animal would risk such abuse? Her initial goal was simple: find out why. She started observing more closely. She'd linger for a few moments after a delivery, pretending to check her phone, watching the cat. It seemed thinner, its movements less fluid. The scratching was often accompanied by low, almost inaudible whimpers. not from the cat, but from somewhere else. She couldn't be sure. The wind played tricks in the narrow alley. One evening, emboldened by the deepening twilight, she approached the spot herself. The cat, which she'd started to think of as Ash for its smoky fur, watched her from a cautious distance, its yellow eyes unwavering. Sarah crouched down. The wood was scored with deep, fresh gouges. She pressed her ear to the boards. For a moment, only the distant city hum, then a faint rhythmic scratching from the other side, and something else, a tiny, almost imperceptible whine. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't Ash making all the noise. Something was in there, trapped. Her mind raced. Who would she call? Animal control? The police? They'd likely dismiss it or take too long. The image of Ash, drenched and limping, flashed in her mind. The thought of Mr. Petrov returning. An overwhelming sense of urgency propelled her. She had to know what was in there. She had to see for herself. She glanced around the alley. Her gaze fell on a discarded length of rusted pipe leaning against a dumpster. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. Her heart pounded. This was probably a terrible idea. Trespassing, vandalism. But the memory of that tiny, helpless whine and Ash's unwavering, desperate vigil pushed aside her fear. She picked up the pipe. The rusted pipe felt heavy and awkward in Sarah's hands. Her first attempts to pry at the boards were clumsy loud. Each creak of wood, each scrape of metal sounded like a gunshot in the quiet alley. Ash watched a silent feline sentinel from atop a nearby dumpster. After a few fruitless minutes, Sarah realized the main panel was too sturdy. However, the cat hadn't been scratching the whole panel, but a smaller, less secure-looking section near the bottom, a piece of what looked like old plywood nailed over a darker gap. She focused her efforts there. The wood was softer, slightly rotten around the edges. She managed to wedge the end of the pipe into a crack. Sweat trickled down her temples despite the cool evening air. She was acutely aware of how exposed she was, how suspicious this must look. What if Petrov came back? Or a police car patrolled down the main street? A low voice startled her. "What in blazes are you doing to that building, young lady?" Sarah jumped, whirling around, pipe held defensively. Mrs. Albright, a stout woman in her late 60s who lived a few doors down and was known for her nightly walks with her yappy terrier, stood at the alley entrance, hands on her hips, the terrier yapping furiously at her ankles. "Mrs. Albright, I heard something," Sarah stammered, lowering the pipe slightly. "I think an animal is trapped inside. The cat, Ash. He's been trying to get at it for weeks." Mrs. Albright's stern expression softened a fraction. "That gray stray been making a racket, that one has. Old man Petrov's been fit to be tied. Said he's going to call the city to trap it." She peered past Sarah at the boarded-up panel. "Trapped, you say?" "I think so. I heard a noise, a whimper." Sarah explained, her voice gaining a little confidence. Mrs. Albright's presence, while initially alarming, was oddly reassuring. She was a known quantity, a neighborhood fixture. Just then, Mr. Petrov's distinct, gravelly voice cut through the air from the front of his store, shouting at some unseen delivery driver who had presumably parked incorrectly. "This whole damn neighborhood's going to the dogs. No respect for property, no respect at all." Sarah and Mrs. Albright exchanged a look. "He's in a mood tonight," Mrs. Albright murmured. "Best be quick about it, dear, if you're going to do something, or call the PSPCA." I'm not sure they'd get here in time." Sarah said, her gaze returning to the panel. "And I don't want him," she nodded towards Petrov's store, "to interfere." Mrs. Albright pursed her lips. "Well, I didn't see anything," she said, turning slowly. "Just out walking Pee-wee. You be careful now." She shuffled away, Pee-wee still yipping. Sarah, heartened by this tacit approval, redoubled her efforts. The wood groaned, splintered. She managed to pry one corner loose. A musty, unpleasant odor wafted out stronger now. She shone her phone's flashlight into the narrow opening. Dust motes danced in the beam, and then she saw it. A flash of matted white fur, a tiny twitching nose. It was too small to be Ash. It was something else entirely. The stakes suddenly felt impossibly high. Ash, who had crept closer, let out a soft, anxious meow, pawing at her leg. He wasn't trying to get in for himself. He was trying to get something out. Her initial goal had been to investigate. Now it was to rescue. She needed more leverage, something stronger than the old pipe. Her gaze swept the alley, overflowing bins, discarded junk. Then she remembered the tire iron in her car parked just around the corner. It was a risk leaving the opening, but the pipe wasn't enough. "Okay, Ash," she whispered. "I'll be right back. Don't let anyone near this." The cat looked up at her, its yellow eyes intense, as if it understood. Sarah sprinted to her beat-up sedan, fumbling for the trunk latch. The tire iron was cold and heavy in her hand, a stark contrast to the frantic heat coursing through her. Back in the alley, Ash was exactly where she'd left him, a furry gargoyle guarding the small breach in the book nook's defenses. The dim glow of a streetlight at the alley's mouth cast long dancing shadows, turning familiar shapes into lurking monsters. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the tremor in her hands. Petrov was still audible, his grumbling drifting from the front of his shop, a counterpoint to the frantic thumping of her own heart. There was no time for finesse now, no time for stealth. The faint whimper she'd heard earlier, a tiny desperate plea, echoed in her memory. Positioning the tip of the tire iron into the crack she'd already started, Sarah put her weight into it. The wood groaned, resisted. She repositioned, aimed for a weaker spot where the plywood was already splintered. "Come on!" she grunted, leveraging with all her strength. There was a sharp, sickening crack. The sound seemed to ricochet off the brick walls of the alley. She froze for a second, expecting Petrov to come running or a neighbor's window to fly open. Nothing. Only the distant city drone and Ash's low, anxious whine beside her. With renewed urgency, she pushed. The plywood panel, rotten and poorly secured, suddenly gave way with a tearing shriek of nails pulling free, collapsing inward into the darkness. Sarah stumbled forward, catching herself against the rough brick. She coughed as a cloud of ancient dust and something else, something rank and unsettling, billowed out. Her flashlight beam, already on, sliced through the gloom. And then she screamed. It wasn't loud, more of a choked, horrified gasp that tore from her throat. Oh my God! Huddled in the far corner of the shallow, dirt-floored crawl space, no bigger than a shoebox, was a puppy. Not just any puppy, but a tiny skeletal creature. Its fur, what should have been white, was matted with filth and feces. Its eyes were sealed shut with crusted discharge, and its little body trembled violently. It was so small, so fragile, it looked like it could be snuffed out with a breath. A pile of sodden, moldy rags lay beneath it, offering no comfort. Ash pushed past her ankles, darting into the opening. He didn't hiss, didn't show any aggression towards the puppy. Instead, he nudged it gently with his head, letting out a soft, crooning meow, a sound Sarah had never heard from him before. He began to lick its tiny, unresponsive face. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes, blurring her vision. The sheer calculated cruelty of it, the desperation of this tiny, trapped life, and the unwavering devotion of the stray cat who had tried for weeks to save it, hit her with the force of a physical blow. This was no longer just about a peculiar cat or a trapped animal. This was something darker, something deliberate. She couldn't go back to her ordinary life, not now. Dropping the tire iron with a clatter, she reached into the foul-smelling space, her hands shaking. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the puppy, to Ash, or to herself. "I've got you." Sarah's hands were gentle as she scooped up the puppy. It was terrifyingly light, its tiny bones sharp beneath the matted fur. It let out a whimper so faint it was barely audible. Ash rubbed against her legs, looking up with an expression of profound, anxious relief. She carefully backed out of the crawl space, cradling the puppy against her chest, trying to shield it with her body heat. "Okay, little one, okay," she murmured, her mind racing. Vet. It needed a vet urgently. She didn't have much money, but that didn't matter right now. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling on the screen. A quick search for 24-hour emergency vets in Philadelphia. The closest one was a 15-minute drive if traffic was kind. As she made the call, explaining the situation in clipped, urgent tones, she was aware of Ash pacing nearby, his gaze fixed on the bundle in her arms. When she hung up, having gotten directions and a warning about potential costs, she looked at the cat. "You knew, didn't you? You knew it was in there?" Ash just blinked slowly, then rubbed his head against her shin. The immediate priority was warmth and hydration. She hurried to her car, carefully placing the puppy on an old towel on the passenger seat, turning the heater on low. Ash surprisingly allowed her to pick him up, his usual feral resistance absent. He settled on the floor by the passenger seat, his attention still riveted on the puppy. The vet clinic was a blur of bright lights and hushed efficiency. A technician whisked the puppy away to an incubator, asking Sarah pointed questions about where she'd found it. Severe dehydration, hypothermia, malnutrition, it's critical, the vet Dr. Ramirez told her later, her expression grave. "It's a fighter, though. We'll do everything we can." Sarah filled out the paperwork, her stomach churning at the estimated cost. She left her details, promising to call in the morning. As she left, the rescue coordinator for the clinic, a kind-faced woman named Maria, caught her arm. "The space you found it in, can you describe it?" Sarah did, explaining about the abandoned book nook, the boarded-up crawl space, the filth. "It looked intentional." Sarah finished the word, tasting bitter. "Like someone meant for it to be hidden there." Maria nodded slowly. "We see this sometimes. Unscrupulous breeders or people involved in illegal pet sales. They use abandoned spots to keep animals before selling them, or to dump the ones that get sick." She gave Sarah a card. "If you remember anything else, or if the police get involved, let us know. We work with law enforcement on animal cruelty cases." Driving home with Ash now asleep on the passenger seat, exhaustion began to set in. But beneath it, a new resolve was forming. Saving the puppy wasn't enough. Someone had put it in that hellish hole, left it to die. And Ash. Ash had been its only lifeline, its desperate four-legged advocate. She thought of Mr. Petrov's casual cruelty, the neighborhood's general indifference to the stray. It all felt connected, a spectrum of neglect and malice. Her new plan began to take shape. She would help the puppy, now tentatively named Pip by the vet staff. She would also find out who was responsible, and she would make sure Ash was safe too. He was no longer just a stray. He was a hero. The next morning, she called Maria back, telling her about Mr. Petrov's actions towards Ash. Maria listened sympathetically and suggested filing a report with the city's animal care and control team, offering to help her with the process. The fight for Pip and for Ash was just beginning. Pip's recovery was slow, a painstaking journey measured in ounces gained and faint tail wags. Sarah visited him daily at the clinic, her bond with the little creature deepening with each visit. Dr. Ramirez was cautiously optimistic, praising Pip's resilience. Ash, meanwhile, had made himself surprisingly at home in Sarah's small apartment. He was still wary of sudden movements, but he'd started purring when she stroked him and often slept at the foot of her bed. He seemed to understand that Pip was being cared for, his frantic energy replaced by a watchful calm. True to her word, Sarah, with Maria's guidance from the animal rescue, filed a formal complaint against Mr. Petrov for his cruelty towards Ash. An animal control officer paid Petrov a visit, issuing a stern warning and a fine that left him sputtering with indignation, but crucially made him leave Ash alone. Mrs. Albright, who had witnessed Petrov's earlier aggression, provided a corroborating statement, a small act of neighborhood solidarity. The mystery of Pip's confinement, however, continued to gnaw at Sarah. Maria had mentioned that the type of neglect Pip suffered was often linked to backyard breeders or illegal puppy mills that cut corners and discarded sick or unwanted animals. They look for out-of-the-way places, abandoned buildings. A crawl space like that is perfect for their horrible purposes, Maria had said. Sarah started paying more attention to whispers in the neighborhood, to online community forums where people sometimes posted about lost pets or suspicious activities. She learned that the Book Nook's former owner, a reclusive old man named Mr. Abernathy, had passed away a few years ago, and the property had been in legal limbo ever since, making it an easy target for illicit use. One evening, scrolling through a local lost and found pet page, a particular post caught her eye. Someone in a neighboring district was looking for a small white terrier puppy, one of a litter that had allegedly been stolen from their yard a few weeks prior. The timeline matched Pip's ordeal. The poster mentioned that they suspected a former handyman. They'd fired a man known to have a string of petty offenses and a reputation for flipping animals for quick cash. His name was Doyle. A cold dread settled over Sarah. She cross-referenced Doyle's name with local public records and found a last known address not too far from the Book Nook. Could this be him? Her investigation felt dangerous now. This wasn't just about an abandoned puppy anymore. It was about someone who actively exploited and harmed animals for profit. She shared her findings with Maria, who in turn contacted a detective she worked with on cruelty cases, Detective Miller. Miller was initially skeptical, given the scant evidence, but agreed to look into Doyle. The waiting was agonizing. Sarah felt like she was on the edge of something significant, but also vulnerable. She found herself looking over her shoulder more often, wary of who might be watching. Ash, perceptive as ever, seemed to sense her anxiety, often staying close, a furry shadow of support. Then Miller called. They'd put Doyle under surveillance. He was indeed involved in selling puppies, operating out of a dilapidated garage leased under a false name. They didn't have enough to tie him directly to Pip yet, but they were building a case. He's been spooked by something, Miller said, moving a lot of stuff around. We think he might be planning to clear out. This was it, the chance to stop him. Miller explained they were planning to raid the garage the next day based on probable cause from his current illegal sales. Your information about the book nook, the description of that crawl space, it helps build a pattern of behavior, a modus operandi. If we find anything there connecting him to other animals, or if Pip's original owners can identify him from photos of Doyle's current stock, we might be able to link him to Pip's case more concretely. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with fear. Justice for Pip and potentially other animals was within reach, all thanks to a stray cat's unyielding determination and her own refusal to look away. The next morning, Sarah was a bundle of nerves. Detective Miller had asked her to be on standby, not at the scene of the raid, too dangerous, but available to answer questions or potentially identify items if needed later. She paced her small apartment, Ash watching her with his usual unnerving acuity. Hours crawled by. Finally, her phone rang. "Sarah Miller here." The detective's voice was crisp. "We got him. Doyle. He was exactly where you thought he'd be, trying to load a van with undersized, unvaccinated puppies. Conditions in that garage, appalling." Relief washed over Sarah, so potent it made her knees weak. "And Pip, any connection?" "We found records, crude notes, mostly in the garage. Descriptions of drop-offs, pickups. One entry mentioned small white runt bookstore alley, no good. The timing, the description, it's Pip." We also contacted the family who reported their litter stolen. They're on their way to see if they can identify any of the puppies we recovered and to give a statement about Doyle. Your initial tip about their online post was crucial. Miller continued, "When we confronted Doyle about the crawl space at the book nook, he denied it at first, then tried to say he found the puppy there and was going to get help. But the evidence from the scene, plus Ash's persistent scratching indicating how long Pip was there, it all points to him dumping Pip when he realized the puppy was too sick to sell quickly. It wasn't a dramatic shootout or a physical confrontation for Sarah, but the impact was just as profound. The man responsible for so much suffering for Pip's near-death experience was caught. His small, cruel enterprise was shut down. Sarah thought of Ash scratching relentlessly at that wooden panel, a lone, desperate guardian. He had been the first witness, the first responder. "Thank you, Detective," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing me." "Thank you, Sarah, and thank that cat of yours. Not often a stray breaks a case for us." Later that day, Maria called from the rescue. The family whose litter had been stolen had indeed identified one of the puppies recovered from Doyle's garage as their missing one. They were heartbroken about the others still missing, but overjoyed to have one back. They also confirmed Doyle was their former handyman. The case against him was now solid. Pip, though not one of their stolen litter, was a testament to his cruelty. In the weeks that followed, life found a new rhythm for Sarah. Pip, after a final vet check, was officially released into her care. He was still small for his age, but his white fur was now fluffy and clean, his eyes bright and curious. He wobbled on sturdy little legs, tail a perpetual blur of motion. Sarah officially adopted him, renaming him Phoenix for the way he'd risen from near death. Ash, now a sleek, well-fed house cat, accepted Phoenix with a surprising tolerance, often found curled up near the puppy's bed, a watchful protector. News of Doyle's arrest and the rescue of the puppies, along with the story of Ash's perseverance, circulated through the Olney neighborhood. Mr. Petrov, humbled by his fine and the community's quiet disapproval, was seen leaving a bowl of cat food near his storefront, though Ash, now firmly Sarah's cat, ignored it. Mrs. Albright, however, would often stop by Sarah's apartment with small treats for both Phoenix and Ash Peewee, yapping his approval. The abandoned book nook became a subject of local discussion. Spurred by the incident, a community group, with Sarah's hesitant participation, began efforts to clean up the alleyway and secure the building properly. There was even talk of petitioning the city to turn the derelict space into a small community garden or a resource center. Mr. Abernathy's distant relatives, tracked down by the city, eventually took responsibility for the property. They were horrified to learn how it had been misused and readily agreed to have the crawl space permanently sealed. Before it was closed, Sarah placed a small weatherproof plaque near where Ash had scratched so diligently. It read, "For Ash the Guardian, never give up." Sarah's life was still a patchwork of jobs, but it felt fuller, now imbued with a sense of purpose she hadn't realized was missing. Looking at Phoenix, chasing a dust mote in a sunbeam, with Ash observing majestically from the windowsill, she knew she wouldn't change a thing. The stray cat who kept scratching at a bookshelf hadn't just saved a puppy. He had awakened a quiet courage in her and nudged a small corner of a sprawling city towards a little more compassion. The faint scars on Ash's torn ear and Phoenix's resilient spirit were reminders that even in the forgotten, neglected places, hope could take root and heroism could wear the unassuming disguise of a dusty gray cat.